Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the free-speaking riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. More and more Canadians are learning how the Liberals and Trudeau are a threat to free speech. Old media outlets have reluctantly begun to report on Bill C-10 and what it means to your freedoms. I've been warning Canadians about Bill C-10 since it was first introduced last November. Let's go back and take a look at what the Liberals are really up to. The first thing you need to know when somebody is trying to suppress free speech is why. The answer is power and control. Take a look. Speaking of standing up for your rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of association are being crushed under the Trudeau Liberals. We all learned last month Justin Trudeau doesn't really believe in free speech when he said, and I quote, "We will always defend the freedom of expression, but freedom of expression is not without limits. For example, we're not allowed to yell fire in a packed theater. In a respectful society such as ours, everyone must be aware of the impact of our words and actions on others. There are communities expressing huge discrimination in Canada today. So yes, we will always defend freedom of expression, but everyone must act respectfully towards others and not try to needlessly or arbitrarily hurt someone we share this planet with." End of quote. And when it comes to taking away your freedom, Justin Trudeau doesn't just talk the authoritarian talk, he walks the authoritarian walk. The government's new internet censorship bill is the perfect example. Trudeau wants nearly $1 billion streaming services tax. He wants to tell companies what programs they can make available for you to watch. With the Liberals and Socialists, it all comes down to power and control. Control over what you see, when you see it, and how you see it. The internet is such a revolutionary technology because it transferred power and control from corporations and governments to individual citizens. That's a threat to people who want to reset our economy to their own advantage, to capitalize off the misery of others. That's why they're pushing for more internet censorship. Help stop this threat to freedom by going to cherylgallant.com/stop-C10. Tell your member of parliament to vote no on internet control. Bill C-10 is just one part of the Liberals' hidden agenda. The Liberals have become so hostile to freedom, Ottawa University professor Michael Geist described them as the most anti-internet government in Canadian history. On top of C-10, they want to bring in a new digital services tax. Just see for yourself. While the Liberals were vague on spending details, they got very specific about certain taxes. The taxes, they say, will be paid by large American corporations. We know they'll be paid by you. The Liberals announced they will be taxing foreign digital services. That means if you want to learn what happens on the next season of The Crown, prepare to pay 13% more. Enjoy watching The Mandalorian on Disney Plus? Well, Baby Yoda gets taxed too. It's not just the streaming services. Gaming services like Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Network, or Steam will be taxed. And it's not just digital services. Any foreign orders which are shipped out from a Canadian warehouse will be hit with the tax. Now, the Liberals and their media allies will tell you that they're doing this for fairness. They say it's not fair that Canadian digital services have to charge GST while their foreign competitors do not. Therefore, they say foreign companies have a competitive advantage. Well, that's exactly why the Conservatives called for an end on the GST to Canadian digital streaming services altogether. That's the big difference between Liberals and Conservatives. When Conservatives see an unfair situation, we propose a solution which restores fairness to those affected while leaving you better off than before. For Liberals, the solutions are always the same: tax it or ban it. The Liberals claim a carbon tax will result in less carbon. So, what is the Liberal goal with a tax on freedom of speech and freedom of expression? Obviously, they want less freedom and less speech. Conservatives have a different approach. When Stephen Harper warned us in 2015 that the Liberals would bring in a Netflix tax if elected, the Liberal media posted their phony little fact check saying it wasn't true. Just remember that the next time you're warned about Liberal plans by Conservatives, only to be told by the Liberal media that it's a conspiracy theory. The Great Reset ring a bell? In fact, it was only a couple of weeks ago we were warning you about Bill C-10. This is the Liberal plan to regulate and censor the internet. The Liberals openly admit C-10 would amount to a nearly $1 billion tax on foreign streaming services. Now they want to add HST on top of that $1 billion. Netflix, Disney, and Amazon are so popular and well-known, they can probably offload these new taxes onto customers and still operate in Canada. However, many of the newer, smaller, specialty streaming services won't be able to afford these Trudeau taxes. Those companies will have to leave the Canadian market. That'll leave you with fewer choices and higher prices. Does that sound fair to you? Because that's the Liberal approach. Raise taxes, fewer choices, higher prices. Everyone being made equally poor is the Liberal definition of fairness. Bill C-10 is just one part of the Liberals' three-part plan. Part 1 is C-10. Part 2 is the digital services tax and the GST applied to everything digital. Part 3 is the Liberal plan to regulate hate speech on social media. Remember, the goal of the plan is power and control. And the ultimate prize, what the Liberals want most of all, is power and control over the algorithms which influence your digital activity. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression are under assault in Canada. They're under assault in a way we have never seen before. In the past, Canadians could rely upon journalists and the media to defend freedom of expression. Not only because defending free speech is the right thing to do, but because they had a clear financial stake in the issue. But when the stakes changed, so did the media's interest in defending free speech. Before social media and search engines came along, the media, television, newspapers, radio, and magazines dominated the advertising industry. These massively profitable media companies enjoyed a near monopoly on advertising dollars. This gave the media companies tremendous power as gatekeepers. These powerful ad-fueled companies had the power to decide what you saw and what you heard and when you saw it and where you heard it. Then the internet arrived to disrupt everything. Google and Facebook came along and provided a better product at a lower price to advertisers. The once powerful media companies were quickly losing money and influence. They began to lobby governments for bailouts, but bailouts just pushed the problem down the road. They need a new plan to ensure their dead business models could continue to stalk the land, like corporate zombies infecting more industries with a desire for protection from competition. That's why so many journalists are calling for social media to be regulated. That's why they even demand that members of parliament act as social media censors. My job is to listen to you, not to censor you. On Friday, Canada's new censor-in-chief, Minister of Heritage, appeared before the committee to discuss the links between government and Facebook. Now, the Liberals didn't want to talk about how close they are with Facebook, so the minister tried to talk about legislation he plans to introduce to regulate social media. The Heritage Minister claims we need this social media regulator for public safety. If there's a public safety issue, then you call the Minister for Public Safety. If there's a propaganda issue, then you call in the Minister of Heritage. Even Facebook has joined the pro-regulation parade. Naturally, if governments mandate certain content moderation thresholds for media companies, it sure makes sense to make it harder to start the next company to replace Facebook the way Facebook overtook MySpace. Despite the Liberals lying about this being a public safety issue, they can't stop bragging about their plans to grab more and more control over what you can see, hear, or even post online. Speaking to the media, the Liberal minister outlined his three-part plan. Quote, "The upcoming legislation is part of a three-pronged approach to the web giants and their influence in Canada," Gibault said. The first being the government's introduction of Bill C-10, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act last November. Later this spring, the government will introduce its third element, additional legislation for media. End of quote. Now, we've spoken about this before on this program about how Bill C-10 will be the first time Canada's government regulated internet content. The bill is a massive deception. They're redefining the word broadcast. A broadcaster was someone who broadly casts out an electromagnetic signal over public airwaves, which anyone with a receiver is free to pick up. An internet streamer is someone who provides data over the internet upon request for a subscription fee. Broadcasters use public airwaves, so governments must regulate them. Liberals want to tax and regulate internet streamers but they cannot because they are not broadcasters using public airwaves. So the government has just decided that they'll call streamers online broadcasters, and poof, like magic, they can be taxed and regulated. You can always tell a government is doing something authoritarian when they pull a move right out of George Orwell's 1984. Relabeling streaming companies as broadcasters, despite the complete lack of any actual broadcasting, is straight out of the dictator's handbook to running an authoritarian regime. The Liberals claim they're concerned about illegal content on social media. The Liberals claim they're bringing in new rules to go after content which is prohibited under the criminal code. For example, hate speech, advocating criminal activity, child pornography, and revenge porn. Posting this type of material is a crime. It's already against the law. When a citizen witnesses a crime, the responsible thing to do is to call in the police. Sadly, the last thing these radical liberals want to do is fund the police. So instead of hiring additional police officers to investigate actual crimes, the Liberals want to hire additional bureaucrats and even more dangerous technocrats. What these new regulators would actually do is not very clear. These regulators are not police, so we know they will not be investigating the criminals. This is so typical of Liberals. Just last week, they voted against stiffer penalties for gun smuggling criminals. But they have billions to spend hiring bureaucrats to chase after lawful gun owners. If the Liberals were really concerned about public safety, they would call the police. Since this is not about public safety, what's it really about? Money and power. The third part of the Heritage Minister's plan is to take money from profitable social media companies and give it to unprofitable legacy media companies. Of course, not all media companies will get the handout. Only those approved by the Liberal government will receive this money. The government's been pretty clear that it wants to take money from social media and streamers, then redistribute it to Liberal-friendly Canadian media companies. It's why they will redefine words like broadcasters. It's why they will censor content on the internet. What you can see, read, or hear online will now be controlled in some fashion by bureaucrats. And just so we're clear, according to the radical socialist running Press Progress, even criticizing the government's plans to regulate the internet streaming and social media is the same as promoting fake COVID cures. So don't be surprised if the media companies go on the attack to defend their censorship program. They'll go on the attack because, as important as money is, the real underlying goal is to control the algorithms which power these internet companies. The bill to relabel internet streamers as online broadcasters gives the CRTC the power to review the company's algorithms for determining what shows to recommend to people. A government-commissioned report released last week on censoring social media recommended the government gain some measure of control over these algorithms, and we know why. Here's a quote from the report. Facebook's algorithms have been tweaked at key moments of political engagement, dialed up at times, and dialed back down in displaying news from trustworthy news organizations. Society needs this dialed up, end quote. No less than a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sat on that commission and co-authored the report. You'd think they would have learned from history. If you give governments the power over these algorithms for the good of society, how long do you think it'll take before governments start using the algorithms for the good of the party? Mark my words, if the Liberals pass these laws, the minute a Conservative government is in power, they'll accuse us of manipulating algorithms because it's what they do. Trudeau hit his agenda to reset our economy and drastically increase the carbon tax during the last election. All the while, the Liberals and the media accused Conservatives of having a hidden agenda. The Liberals always accuse Conservatives of what they plan to do. The Liberals want you to live in austerity, but will accuse us of pushing austerity. It's what they do. Once they control the content of algorithms, their propaganda will be unstoppable. Please like and share this video before it's too late and Trudeau takes away that right. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant. This is Trudeau's hidden agenda. He wants control and power over how you live and how you think. Canadians would naturally reject a power grab like this, so that is why Bill C-10 is based on a lie. It is an act of fraud. It'll restrict free speech and expression, and it'll make Canada less open and less diverse. I won't stand for it, and neither should you.
Canadians are proud of our stories. The storytellers want to share their stories with the world. This government claims Bill C-10, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act, will support the Canadian storytellers. We all know it won't support all Canadian storytellers, just the government-approved storytellers. And what is the price to support this government-approved storytellers? According to the government, the financial price is close to $1 billion. But what about the cost to freedom of expression, regulating the internet, demanding control over algorithms, restricting foreign programming? Is this really a price Canadians wish to pay to not watch Central Committee-approved bland television production? If Canadians knew the real cost and consequences of the Liberal bill to regulate the internet, what they really were, they would reject it entirely. There are three things the Canadians need to understand about this bill. First, it's a deception. They're changing the very definition of the words in order to grab some money for their friends. Second, it is an attack on freedom of expression. Mandating speech is the same as restricting speech. Third, in proclaiming to support diversity, this government will reduce diversity of stories that Canadians have access to. And this will have a particular set of consequences for new Canadians and refugees who speak neither of the two official languages. This is what happens when governments strip our liberties away. The least powerful pay the highest price. But we all bear a cost, and that's the reason for this deception. They cannot be honest about what they're doing because what they're doing violates the charter. It violates freedom of expression. So we have the deception, the attack on free speech, and the attack on diversity. And let's begin with the deception. For that, we need to go back to why we have a Broadcast Act. Why is there a Broadcast Act regulating television and radio, but not Newsprint Act regulating newspapers? Because newspapers use their own print and paper to express their views. Broadcasters use public airwaves to broadly cast out electromagnetic signals, which televisions and radio receivers can pick up. Airwaves are a classic public good. Broadcasters can't use the same frequency or their signals become lost. Frequencies have to be allocated by the government, or else everyone would broadcast on every frequency and nobody would get a signal. For-profit broadcasters cannot charge customers for the signal after they've already broadcasted out. The broadcasters were introduced to advertisers, and they all made a lot of money. The governments later told these broadcasters, in returning for making huge profits from public airwaves, they'd be required to support Canadian storytellers, artists, and musicians. Canadians were largely supportive of using Canadian airwaves to support Canadians. Even when cable came along, government had a role in regulating cable monopolies for the public good. Now, this arrangement was good for the companies, good for the government, funded committee-approved storytellers, and good for the advertisers. Any Canadian with a radio, TV, and some rabbit ears could watch or listen to the free entertainment. The business model was simple. Cast out the programs to the broadest audience possible, then sell the viewership to the advertisers. Canadian consumers of music and stories received quantity over quality. But then the internet came along and changed everything. It changed everything for advertisers. Just ask the newspapers who, ironically enough, now lobby for a Newsprint Act to bail them out. It changed everything for musicians and storytellers. Just ask Justin Bieber if he'd have the globe-spanning career were it not for YouTube. And it changed everything for consumers. No longer did they have to sit at a specific time to watch a somewhat decent program. Now they can watch when they want, but more importantly, they can watch really, really what they want. For nearly 70 years, the biggest change in TV broadcasting was color TV. Then in the last 20 years, everything from production to distribution has been revolutionized. In response to this tremendous revolution in technology and entertainment and in opportunities, in response to all the change, this government's only play is to fall back on a 70s era protectionist talking points and slap a 1930s era legislation on a 21st century technology. It's old. And it's tired, and it's a deception. These companies don't use public airwaves to broadcast out a signal. It's ridiculous to call them broadcasters. The only reason they're doing it is to stretch the justification of regulating public airwaves into a justification for regulating private viewing. Now, as I said in my initial remarks, they have to commit this deception to hide the truth. This is regulating expression. It's a limit on speech. Our freedom of speech and our freedom of expression are not just about the right to be heard. It's also about the right to hear, to listen, to see, to understand. It's a human right, not a Canadian privilege. What is a privilege is to live in a time and a place where we can experience stories from any human on earth. The internet has turned all of us into both broadcasters and receivers. This government seeks to regulate that. It seeks to control it. It wants to put the toothpaste back into the tube and turn the clock back to the 70s. They want to bring back the beachcombers, but it's not going to happen. It's 2020. And if there's ever been a year when Canadians appreciate the ability to watch what they want when they want it, it's now. This government has a different plan. They want to regulate what you can watch. They want to charge a tax on these streamers to even have the opportunity to offer Canadians any kind of programming. Madam Speaker, these new taxes and regulations will cut Canadians off from a growing, rich, diverse array of new streaming services from all across the world. The Liberal attack on freedom of expression is an attack on diversity. And the Liberals claim this tax will help them fund a new film school of grads with diverse backgrounds. But what about the thousands of diverse Canadians who lose out? Does this Liberal government really believe an Indian Bollywood streaming service is going to stay in the Canadian market if it's required to produce an unprofitable amount of programming? The grandmother who recently arrived on a family reunification visa, sure better hope so. She might be in luck due to the millions of Canadians who watch those films. But what about new Canadians from different countries? Will every foreign language streaming service in every country be required to produce Canadian content?
By now, I hope you agree on the danger the Trudeau Liberals represent to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. We have to stop Bill C-10, and you can help. Go to cherylgallant.com/stopc10 and write to your member of parliament. Share this video with as many people as you know. Together, we can keep Canada strong and free.